Hi, everybody. Welcome. Today, I'm with John Elmuccio. John is with Evolution St. Louis. They are a very high-end digital knitting operation, and we're talking about fashion tech and the digital brand and enabling that. Welcome, John. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be here.
For the average person, they might be surprised that you guys exist, that fashion technology exists. So tell everybody a little bit about what you're doing that the average person can kind of relate to your operation.
So what we have done, we've tried to take technology and build that into the apparel supply chain. Everybody's familiar with digital printing. So if you can imagine, our machinery is capable of digitally knitting products. Yarn comes in one end of our machines and total garments fully shaped come out the other end of our machine. And it's not limited only to garment manufacturing. We have applications for the automotive industry, the medical industry, and the shoe industry. We should literally knit a ball if we wanted to.
So that's really interesting. It's this idea of this digital knitting. Can you give some specific examples of what people might have in their homes or see day to day?
People look at knitting typically in terms of sweaters with the type of machines that we have, which are called flatbed knitting machines. That's probably the easiest way to explain what an average person might have in their homes. But the technology that we have is literally the latest technology available in this machinery. This technology has been around for a while. It's been used predominantly in innovation labs. We've just taken that technology and commercialized it.
I've seen some amazing stuff that Nike does and knitting uppers for running shoes where you could literally change the performance requirements from the forefoot to the toe to the heel. What are some other kinds of things that come out of your operation?
So yes, you're correct. The Nike Flyknit was developed on the Stoll flatbed knitting machines, and that gives you an idea of the capabilities. We're actually able to knit not only different structures within one garment, but we're able to knit different types of tensions so that, for example, if we were knitting something where we wanted support in the back, we might have more tension in the knit structure in the back. We're able to knit in the same garment on the same piece a rib and a jersey as an example, or an intarsia. So we're able to do things that beforehand were never capable to be done.
So like performance wear, like where you want to have, the arms have one feature and the torso has, or, like shapewear and all of those kinds of things. Traditionally, that would be made by piecing together a lot of different components with a lot of different characteristics and hand making those. But now you're able to do that all in one garment. And then it's like from a digital design, so you don't have to have a huge inventory of sizes. You can make them customized one off if you had to. With this kind of methodology, is that where it's moving?
Yes, the capabilities are there to do one-offs. However, we're not looking at doing this as small batch manufacturing. We want to be able to do that and take that and be able to customize or semi-customize, for example, where brands have in the past, because of the supply chains overseas, where they needed a 15 or 18 month cycle, would need to be able to plan what they wanted to buy and really guess what the size ranges would be. Now they can place only a portion of their order and be able to react to what the consumer is buying. And then while we're in production, we're able to adjust what sizes we're able to make for them.
I had this idea of the fashion industry as a designer comes up with something, it gets sent overseas, and then hundreds of people toil to make thousands and thousands of copies that get all sent back here, and that a lot of inventory sits in warehouses and stuff. And it doesn't sound like that's the case. That's what it's moving to. So tell me a little bit about what the fashion industry was like, and what it's becoming.
Yeah, so the reason that we built Evolution St. Louis here in St. Louis was to build an industry sector because we saw an opportunity because of how much labor was being used to manufacture goods. Typically people envision clothing manufacturing where there's one person and one sewing machine, which is very labor intensive. With our equipment, we actually have one person can run a bank of 12 machines. So it reduces the cost of labor dramatically in addition to allowing us to build structures and garments that you were not able to build in the past.
Without all of that inventory and all of that long supply chain that you were talking about. Interesting. Yeah. You talked about making St. Louis this center. Why St. Louis? What are the attributes that make this a good place to start?
Well, my partner and I have been collectively in this business for about 75 years. Sometimes it's painful to say, but it's true. The last brand that we've had together was a licensing company, and we started to notice a dynamic shift in consumer buying patterns. People like Macy's were going from 800 stores to 300 stores. Consumer was buying more online. There's a whole generation growing up buying direct-to-consumer brands. And as we looked at the supply chain that exists overseas and the amount of time that it takes from design to manufacturing, which is often a 15 to 18 month cycle, we recognized that because of this new consumer buying pattern, that there needed to be domestic manufacturing in order to respond to that. And as we started to look into the technology and where we wanted to build this facility, our first inclination was the Carolinas, where apparel manufacturing was typically based, but that mentality is still very cut and sew, very labor intensive. My partner, who is from Michigan, we moved our project into Michigan. We were pretty far down the road with the city of Detroit. We had met with the mayor's office, picked out a building, and we actually got a phone call from a woman by the name of Susan Sherman, who started the St. Louis Fashion Fund here, which is an incubator that supports young designers and their ability to get into the business and get their product out there. She became very excited about what we were doing and encouraged us to visit St. Louis. And the city opened up its arms to us. And one of the things that we noticed about the city that we were unaware of is that St. Louis used to be the second largest apparel manufacturing center in the U.S. and the second largest shoe manufacturing center. There's a heritage of that in the city that the city embraced and wanted to recapture.
You know, I think a lot of people in St. Louis aren't aware of kind of the legacy of that, from Caleres, the former Brown Shoe. Their old factory is the City Museum now, you know. So John, talk a little bit about this whole, I see things on my phone and all the way through how it's goes through the supply chain and how it's delivered to me and how I pick it up, but that's all becoming more digital. Tell me about how the status quo of fashion is changing and the role you guys are playing in that.
Yeah, so good question. I think that the business has evolved from a 15 to 18 month manufacturing cycle overseas to where it needs to be much closer to demand. And the ability to manufacture not only with our high-tech advanced machines, but the ability to be able to react to demand because we're able to take a position on yarns as opposed to finished piece goods allows us to be able to be very flexible in the manufacturing process. Designs that we get from our brands and retailers are digitally input into machine code, and we're able to take that machine code, send it directly to our machines, and be able to monitor our production actually from our phones from anywhere in the world.
That's amazing. And I imagine there's a whole ecosystem around that. You know, I've noticed on your website, you know, Stoll, the company that makes the machines that you use, but I've also noticed that there are finance partners in this space because, you know, somebody has to finance the float of production, and there are other people. What are the entrepreneurial opportunities in this space, in this new ecosystem that's emerging?
Our goal here in St. Louis was not to build this one factory, but to build an industry sector. And my partner recognized, and I recognized, that we couldn't do it alone, that we needed to make a collaboration between .com, .gov, .org, and .edu. And that's what we tried to do. The .org piece of it is obviously the St. Louis Fashion Fund and Innovation Labs. .gov has been the city and the state being involved in this. .com, and then we've engaged the educational community, WashU, places like Penn State, NC State, to be able to train the workers in the technology that we're using so that we have a pipeline of workers for the future.
So tell me about, you know, for the talent that you need to hire, but also like the skill set that's kind of building up around this, you know, in other areas.
So one of the great things about this technology and what we're building here in St. Louis is that we're creating net new jobs that create sustainable incomes at good wages. In our programming environment, that's specific programming on the proprietary software that's related to these machines, whether it's M1 Plus or Apex. This is very, very specific programming that relates to how to take a design or a concept and turn that into machine code. So it's very high-skilled labor. And then in our machine areas, our technicians need to be very mindful in knowing how to operate, not CNC machines, but machines that are very digitally capable. So they have to have very specific skills. So most of the jobs that we're creating are high-skilled jobs.
There's a lot of people that are kind of rethinking, like, what does it look like to prepare for that? You know, St. Louis has Launch Code. Launch Code is also in other cities. Then there's other, technical schools and stuff. Do you find that people are getting on board with those kinds of skills that people need to have, or do you think there's an opportunity to do more training?
Yes, again, good question. I think the answer is some of a little bit of all of the above of what you just mentioned. There are some schools that already have programs that are teaching the coding that we require. We've been in active conversations with some local universities, WashU and Rankin Tech, about creating curriculum for the future so that they will be able to have students that come out with those skills. We have an internship program here. And then we also have a very strong collaboration with Stoll, who's a machine manufacturer in Germany, where they have created or sending teams of engineers to live here in St. Louis to help us train the workers of the future.
There's clearly a workforce and a development opportunity. So talk a little bit about, for the designer and the entrepreneur that wants to play a role in this. So, there are designers like Lori Coulter and what she and the team are doing at Somersault. And I don't know if they work with you or not, but whether it be somebody like them or a major brand or a major licensor of a brand or an up-and-coming designer that you might run into from the fashion fund, how do they start plugging into this, and what are the ways that this ecosystem can start growing?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, we are working with Somersault. It's a nice St. Louis story. We're happy to be partnering with them. In their case, I think the advantage is speed to market and being able to react more closer to demand. They're a very strong direct-to-consumer brand, and that's a big part of the ethos of what we can supply to them. I think with a lot of emerging designers, it's very, very cost prohibitive for them to try and produce samples overseas. Oftentimes, because the factories in China, for example, require such large minimums that they're unwilling to do development work for these brands. We have the ability, because of our short lead times and access to machines here in St. Louis, to be able to work with them and create lower minimums to make it viable for them to start their brands.
We've touched on the idea of direct-to-consumer. There's also another term many people use, digitally native vertical brands. So the idea of brands that really exist digitally and how they do their marketing and how they do their fulfillment and how they do their, all of that is digital. But, there's also a lot of talk that may not be long-term sustainable because a lot of those are venture-backed companies what they're really doing is they're using a lot of investor money to build a market. But, can you talk about what are the attributes of a brand in the fashion space that's going to be able to work long-term? Because you're competing also with the fast fashion brands that, they've really figured out how to produce product as low a cost as possible. So what does the future look like for brands to succeed?
I think part of that, there's been a little bit of a pushback by the consumer on fast fashion brands. A lot of that has to do with sustainability and impact on the environment. Because a lot of the fast fashion brands, while they're very fast to market and they're inexpensive, they're disposable products. And that's creating a tremendous problem with landfill. The clothing industry is the second largest polluter in landfills. So part of what new emerging brands are trying to do is have traceability in their supply chains. And that's another aspect that we're very strongly involved with. Sustainability is no longer a warm and fuzzy word. The consumer is demanding that, and that's another thing that's important to brands these days.
So you said that you guys are busy, you're trying to hire. Is this the kind of thing that you have, you have a set number of printers, or of knitting machines right now and you just add to that, or do you need to add capabilities, or talk about what your growth looks like?
When we started this business, our investors said to us, well, why don't you buy one or two machines and see how it goes? But what we really wanted to build was the ability to do meaningful manufacturing. So we started off with 30 of the latest high-tech machines in the world. We currently are the most technologically advanced factory in the world in flatbed knitting. We can say that because the serial number on our machine started at 0001. We have the capability in this facility, which is 32,000 square feet, to add another 20 machines, which we will do by second quarter of next year. And we're also in the process, because of demand, of building a second facility. It's 130,000 square feet that will open mid-2022 that will house approximately 240 machines. So the goal by the end of 2022 is to have 300 of the latest technologically advanced knitting machines in the world right here in St. Louis.
That's pretty amazing. In St. Louis on Washington Avenue, the ready-to-wear shoe and hat industries were huge at one point. They used to cart the hides over from the stockyards across the Mississippi River, and they just kept moving down Washington until they left town. And at some point, some huge percentage of the shoes or hats in the U.S. came out of St. Louis. Do you have a sense of that volume of all of the total garments? How much could we start seeing made, not just in St. Louis and what you guys are doing, but really much closer to the consumer and much more responsive?
Yeah, so from a volume perspective, just to give you a rough idea, it's difficult to do it in terms of number of garments, but these machines can produce revenue of anywhere from about $700,000 to $1 million a year. So if you just do the simple math, we're looking at growth to $300 million with what we're planning right now. But we see this as $1 billion opportunity. There's a tremendous white space available in the marketplace right now. We're the first ones to stick a flag in the ground. St. Louis has been a big part of that and will help us grow to that. But we think that there's a real opportunity for U.S. manufacturing to take hold. But we have to start somewhere, and we have to take a stand to do it.
So think about a few years in the future, and you're succeeding. You've made this $1 billion business, and you look around the room, and there's a holiday party for everybody in the ecosystem. What are the kinds of entrepreneurs and designers and people that have come up that have titles or companies that nobody's ever heard of before that are going to be part of that? What's that ecosystem look like more than just you guys?
I think that one of the reasons that we're having very active conversations with the educational community is that they need to create new curriculum. They're still teaching the old methodology because that's the way business used to be. They're still teaching traditional draping, traditional pattern making. Everything has moved to digital right now, and they need to really embrace that as the foundation of what they're teaching in fashion. And so we are helping them to understand what those skill sets need to be for their students. As a matter of fact, we had one of the heads of the Kent University spend the summer here to work in our factory so that she can get practical knowledge to bring back to the university to be able to teach. So I think there's kind of an evolutionary process happening right now where the mindset of how business used to be and what a factory used to look like and how manufacturing, how the apparel industry used to be needs to change, and there needs to be a vision for what it should be and how it is going.
So this is an amazing ecosystem that's growing in this $1 billion opportunity. And here you guys are doing this. Who are some of the other influencers in this ecosystem that are making this happen that maybe aren't just directly involved with digital knitting that people ought to be paying attention to?
I alluded to earlier that there's also an evolution happening in yarn technology. There are amazing developments happening in yarn. We've gotten to the point where there are companies like Evernew, which is an emerging company that's able to take garment waste, break it down into a molecular basis, reconstitute it into a syrup, and create new fibers. So that technology is amazing and evolving so that we can create more sustainable supply chain. There are yarns that are RFID capable. There are yarns that can measure your body temperature and tell whether you're warm or cold and adjust accordingly. So there's amazing technologies happening in the yarn industry. There's also, as I said earlier, a big push in sustainability. People like a group out of San Francisco, the Fiber Shed, that's tracking how wool is grown and how the animals are treated and how the land is treated. So there's all sorts of partners that are attached to this industry that are pulling together to help make this happen, in addition to the educational community and the typical players within this industry. The brands like Somersault, which are looking at it from a distribution model. And the other reason that we were very enamored with St. Louis is that this is the center of the country. You know, we talked about carbon footprints. We're only 2 hours from either coast. People don't have to travel 16 hours overseas. So the ability to be able to have a smaller carbon footprint is another important component.
From a, obviously fashion, I mean, it's functional, but, there's a lot about how we express ourselves through how we dress, and designers and brands do a lot to help us kind of curate that. Who are some designers that are they really get the potential of what we're doing, that this is, look to them to see where this is going rather than just doing more effectively what used to happen? Who's really making the most of the technology?
Yeah, so that's one of the challenges that we have, is actually educating our brands and retailers as to what these machines are capable of. Up to now, they've been predominantly used in innovation labs. The brands that are really taking advantage of it are, the shoe brands like Nike, which have been utilizing this technology for years. And as you know, the Flyknit was developed on these machines. So they're probably farther along in their development and understanding of the capability of these machines. But also in technical textiles, people who are making compression medical devices have been working with these capabilities and really looking to us to create products that have never been produced before. As an example, we're working on a project now where if you know that the tape that's used by athletes called Tyvek, where it's used to support them where if they have an injury, we're now integrating those type of structures into knee braces so that you don't have to use that tape. And we're able to knit that technically into one garment. So I think that the evolution of understanding is just beginning in the apparel industry. Some of the larger brands, the Ralph Laurens of the world, the Allbirds, are aware of the technology, have been working with both Stoll and Shima, the two major suppliers of these machines, and have reached out to us and have a greater understanding. But it's an evolutionary process, and part of what we do when we work with existing customers is take what they're giving us and tell them how we can make it better.
So, John, this has been a great conversation. You really helped me understand this. I think it helped our listeners and readers too. But let's just kind of blue sky this. What's a call to action you painted this picture of more responsive fashion that's more sustainable, that is without the waste, but without the big lag. So tell me a little bit about what's your wish list for making this ecosystem happen that everybody else could participate?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a willingness to collaborate. As I mentioned, my partner and I, we're looking to build an industry sector here. We're smart enough to know we can't do it by ourselves. And we also need to be able to have the support system in place to build this manufacturing sector. We need to have the yarn suppliers and the spinners and the dyers and those businesses to really look at the opportunity that's available here in the States. We need to re-engage the educational community, as we said. Whoever is looking to do a project like this, whether it's in flatbed knitting or whatever industry sector they're in, I would encourage them to engage their local governments, engage their educational systems, and engage everybody around them to help them build it. It's a real white space for us to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. right now, but not with the old jobs, with the jobs of the future.
Well, thanks so much, John. Check out the links in the story to John's company and some of the companies he's talked about, but also to think about what you might do to participate in this. Thanks so much, John. Have a great day.
Thanks, Dan. Be well, everyone.